Have you ever found yourself pausing, maybe after a really vivid dream, and just wondering if what you perceive right now, what you see, hear, feel, is truly real, like fundamentally real? Or maybe you've looked at the world, seen things changing, constantly leaves falling, seasons turning, people aging, and thought, what if everything I thought I knew about change was just wrong?
Like completely wrong.
Yeah, profoundly, maybe even unsettlingly wrong. Well, get ready, because today we're diving deep into the mind of a truly fascinating and often, let's be honest, pretty counterintuitive figure from ancient philosophy who dared to challenge exactly those perceptions, Parmenides.
He certainly did. A real challenger.
Okay, so let's unpack this. For this deep dive, we've got some carefully chosen excerpts from a really foundational work on Western philosophy, and they focus specifically on the revolutionary ideas of Parmenides.
Right.
Our mission today is to pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge, the key insights from these sources about his groundbreaking, and I have to say, often incredibly perplexing ideas.
Perplexing is a good word for it.
Think of this as like your shortcut to understanding why Parmenides isn't just some obscure name, why he's considered one of the most historically important figures in all of philosophy, especially, and this is key, for inventing a type of metaphysical argument based on pure, unyielding logic.
Mm-hmm.
It really set a precedent, didn't it? For literally thousands of years of thinking that followed.
It absolutely did. And what's truly fascinating here, I think, is just the sheer audacity of his thought. I mean, he didn't just tinker with existing ideas.
No.
He dared to question the very fabric of existence itself. He pushed everyone, us included, and every philosopher after him, to fundamentally rethink our most basic assumptions about reality.
And not just reality, but how we even talk about it, right? The language we use.
Exactly. How we use language to describe that reality. His arguments are incredibly profound, and yes, they are undeniably challenging to our everyday, intuitive sense of a dynamic, changing world. He kind of forces you into a corner, logically speaking. Makes you confront what your most basic thoughts and words actually imply.
Okay, so to really get Parmenides, we need a bit of context. Set the stage. He was from Iliia, which was a Greek colony down in southern Italy.
Right, Magna Graecia.
Exactly. And his florute, that's the fancy term for it, like his peak period.
When he was most active, yeah.
Was around 490 BC. So first half of the 5th century BC. Now, the fact that our sources tell us he was known personally by both Plato and Socrates.
Which is huge.
Two giants who came after him and whose impact is just immeasurable. That immediately tells you how significant Parmenides must have been in his own time. His ideas were clearly foundational.
Absolutely. And understanding his intellectual environment is, well, it's critical. Parmenides wasn't just thinking in a vacuum. He came out of a slightly different philosophical tradition than the earlier Ionian guys, like Thales or Anaximander.
Who were more focused on the physical world, like what's the basic stuff everything's made of.
Precisely. They were mostly looking for natural explanations, the primary substance. But in contrast, the schools down in South Italy and Sicily, where you had figures like Empedocles, Zeno, Melissus, Gorgias, Protagoras, they were often much more inclined towards, let's say, mysticism and religion.
Ah, interesting. A different vibe.
A different vibe, yeah. And that region also had this profound influence from Pythagorean mathematics, which back then wasn't just numbers. It was deeply tied up with mystical and spiritual ideas. You know, the belief that numbers held the key to the universe's divine order.
So a mix of logic and mysticism almost.
You could say that. This unique blend of a rigorous, almost mathematical logic combined with a kind of mystical leaning towards an underlying, unchanging reality that definitely colors Parmenides' thought. But his critical historical importance, as you said, you just can't overstate it.
Right.
He practically invented a form of metaphysical argument, arguing about the fundamental nature of reality that, in one form or another, you can find echoing through most subsequent metaphysicians, all the way down to Hegel in the 19th century. It just highlights his foundational role. He grounded metaphysics, the study of what is in logic, in a deductive framework, in a way that hadn't really been done so explicitly before. He demanded we use reason to figure out what must be true about existence, not just observe what seems true.
And this is where Parmenides makes that really radical break. He sets himself completely apart, while Heraclitus was famously saying everything changes. You know, you can't step into the same river twice.
The flux doctrine.
Right. Parmenides notoriously fired back that, quite simply, Nothing changes.
Nothing.
Absolutely nothing. I mean, just imagine that. He completely rejected this intuitive idea of flux, motion, becoming everything that seems so obvious to us. It's like looking at a waterfall and saying, nope, that's static.
It's stunning, isn't it?
Hmm.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, Parmenides wasn't just, like, disagreeing with Heraclitus politely.
No.
He was fundamentally dismantling the whole concept of flux and motion that seemed self-evident to pretty much everyone, and to us today. He was challenging our gut feeling about a dynamic, changing world with this radical, counterintuitive claim based on what he saw as pure logical necessity.
So it wasn't just change is slow or change is an illusion.
No, he's arguing it was logically impossible, which requires a complete rethink of how we even conceptualize existence. It's a truly mind-bending leap he's asking us to take.
So how did he actually lay out these incredibly radical ideas? His main work, where he puts forth his whole doctrine, is famously called Poem on Nature.
Right, written in verse, which was common then.
And this poem is structured quite carefully, isn't it? Divided into two main parts, the way of truth and the way of opinion.
And that distinction isn't just, chapter headings. It's absolutely central to understanding his entire philosophical project. The way of truth, that's the path to real, undeniable knowledge, and is based purely on reason, on logic, on what must be true. This path is all about what is, what genuinely exists in a fundamental, unchanging sense.
And the other way, the way of opinion.
That's based entirely on our senses, what we see, hear, touch. And Parmenides condemned this way. He called it deceptive, full of mere illusion.
So trust logic, not your eyes and ears.
Exactly. For him, anything derived from sensory experience was fundamentally unreliable. It leads only to error. He believed our senses show us a world of change, motion, multiple things. But this world, while it seems real, is ultimately an illusion that reason exposes as impossible.
Wow. He even rejected the idea of opposites, didn't he? Like hot and cold.
He did. He apparently thought, for instance, that cold doesn't actually describe a real quality. It just means not hot.
Oh.
And similarly, dark only means not light. For Parmenides, in the way of truth, there are no real fundamental opposites. There's only being, that which exists, and the absence of being or non-being.
And non-being is a big problem for him.
A huge problem. As we'll see, he basically denied that non-being could even exist or be thought about.
So wait, if I say, this room is cold, Parmenides would argue I'm not describing an actual property of coldness that exists in the world. I'm just saying it lacks heat.
That seems to be the implication, yes.
That feels so weird. I mean, cold feels like a thing. What about light and dark? Is dark just not light? Why was getting rid of opposites so important for his argument?
Well, think about it. For Parmenides, if you say coldness is a real thing, fundamentally opposite to hotness, or darkness is truly opposite to lightness, you'd be suggesting that coldness or darkness are distinct forms of being.
Okay.
But if everything that is just being, this one single undifferentiated reality, then these apparent opposites must be just human constructs. They're deceptive ways our senses carve up the world, leading us down that way of opinion.
I see. So admitting opposites would admit plurality, difference into reality.
Exactly. His logic demands a universe where there's only one fundamental reality.
Mm-hmm.
Anything that seems different or opposite is just a superficial appearance. Saying cold means not hot, implies cold doesn't really is a positive quality itself. It's merely a negation of something that does exist, which is hotness or maybe being warm.
Got it.
And this logic applies to everything else that seems to change or come into being. If something exists, it is. If it doesn't, it is not. And for Parmenides, you can't even coherently think about is not.
So what does this way of truth, this path of pure reason actually reveal? What is real, according to Parmenides?
According to him, the only true being is the One, which he describes as infinite, indivisible, and utterly unchanging.
The One. Okay. And it's important you said not to think of this as like God.
Right. It's not conceived as a personal God or a conscious entity in any way we would normally think of it. He speaks of it more abstractly, almost geometrically, like a sphere.
A sphere. Why a sphere?
Well, maybe because a sphere is perfectly uniform, the same in all directions from the center. But the key thing is it cannot be divided, because in his view, the whole of it is present everywhere, uniformly. There are no parts.
Okay, hold on. How can it be indivisible and everywhere? That sounds contradictory.
This is where his logic really kicks in, and it ties directly back to his rejection of non-being and change. Imagine a universe with absolutely no gaps, no empty space at all.
Okay, like completely full.
Completely full. Nowhere for anything to start or stop, and no point that's different from any other point. Conceptually, it's like a perfectly smooth, solid, infinite sphere. Not a physical one, but a conceptual one. Every single bit of it is identical to every other bit.
So no edges, no
No
divisions.
north, no south, no inside, no outside, because it's all just being. A continuous, undifferentiated plenum, as philosophers sometimes call it.
Okay.
If existence is fundamentally what is, then nothingness or non-being literally cannot exist,
Uh-huh.
because you can't think it or speak it coherently.
Right, that's his core point.
And if there's no nothingness, then there can be no empty space, no voids. And if there's no empty space, well, how could you separate or divide the one?
You couldn't. There'd be nowhere to divide it into.
Exactly. It must be continuous, full, and therefore omnipresent and indivisible, like that perfect uniform sphere. Which raises this huge question for us. If existence is just this continuous, undifferentiated what is, what does that mean for our everyday experience of division, boundaries, separate objects?
It means they're not real. You, me, this microphone, the room, they're all illusions.
According to Parmenides' strict logic, yes.
Yeah.
They must all be illusions, mere appearances, because fundamentally it's all just the one. Everything we perceive as distinct is just how things seem on the surface, not how they are fundamentally.
Wow. Okay. This brings us to his absolute core logical argument then. The heart of his philosophy, the bit that, as you said, echoed for centuries. He states, "Thou canst not know what is not. That is impossible, nor utter it, for is the same thing that can be thought and that can be."
That's the one. And it's arguably one of the most impactful lines in ancient philosophy.
It is the same thing that can be thought and that can be.
What's truly fascinating and utterly revolutionary about this is the absolute identity Parmenides draws between thought and being. For him, if you can genuinely think about something, it must exist.
He must.
It must. And conversely, if it exists, it can be thought. This isn't just, a clever phrase. It's the foundational principle he uses to derive all his radical, paradoxical conclusions. Let's maybe walk through the logic he uses to reject change based on this.
Yeah, please. How does thought equals being lead to no change?
Okay, so think about something coming into being,
Hmm.
like a seed becoming a plant. If something comes into being, it must have previously not been.
Right.
The plant was not yet a plant when it was a seed.
Sure. Makes sense.
But according to Parmenides, you cannot truly think or utter what is not what doesn't exist. Try right now to genuinely conceive of pure nothingness, not empty space, not the absence of something, but absolute non-existence.
Yeah, it's hard. As soon as I try to picture it, it becomes a concept of nothingness.
Exactly. The moment you try to conceptualize it, you've made it something in your mind. It's a concept, a thought. So for Parmenides, non-being is literally unthinkable and unspeakable. Therefore, if something comes into being from non-being, that implies non-being exists and can be thought about, which he just argued is impossible.
So coming into being is impossible because it would have to come from the unthinkable nothing.
Precisely. Now, apply the same logic to passing away. If something passes away, it ceases to be. It goes from being something to being nothing or non-being.
Okay.
But again, ceasing to be implies moving into a state of not being, which is, by his logic, impossible to think or utter. You can't think of something that is not. Therefore, passing away is also impossible.
Wow.
And that's exactly how he logically extinguishes the very concepts of becoming and passing away. And if those are impossible, then all change, all motion, all plurality, they're all impossible too.
So our very ability to think about or talk about something locks it into existence. And because we can't think about non-being, nothing can ever start or stop existing. That's not just a word puzzle. That's a direct assault on everything we experience.
It is a frontal assault. It forces you to really consider what your words and thoughts actually commit you to. Are our words about change actually coherent under this kind of absolute logical microscope? It's almost like he's saying our language itself traps us in this illusion of an unchanging reality, or rather reveals the true unchanging reality.
Yeah.
And he doubles down on this connection. He says, the thing that can be thought, and that for the sake of which the thought exists, is the same. For you cannot find thought without something that is as to which it is uttered.
Okay, break that down a bit.
He's basically saying that for thought or language to mean anything at all, to be coherent, it must refer to something that is, something that exists outside the thought itself, something stable and unchanging in its being.
So every thought, every word needs a real existing object out there to be meaningful. It can't just be an idea.
According to his strict logic, yes. And that's the core reason he denies change. If change were real, things would have to come from non-being or go into non-being. But since non-being is unthinkable and unspeakable, that transition is impossible. Therefore, change itself is impossible.
Hmm.
Which raises this incredibly important question for us, thinking about this now. If a word needs to mean something,
Mhm.
does that meaning really imply its constant, unchanging existence? Even if we're talking about something, say, historical
Yeah.
or fictional.
Right. And this is where it gets really, truly mind-bending for us today. Because Parmenides applies the super strict logic to specific examples that just seem, well, frankly absurd from our modern viewpoint.
Like George Washington.
Exactly. The sources use the classic example of George Washington. Parmenides, if he followed his logic consistently, would have to argue that if you talk about George Washington, he must exist right now.
Right now, as you speak.
Otherwise, how could your words possibly mean anything? How could you talk about him?
Yes, and this is where his argument seems so obviously counterintuitive, maybe even false, to us, that it risks becoming a kind of philosophical joke.
Mm.
But the source explains his reasoning. Since we can now know, think about, and speak about what we usually call the past, it can't really be past.
It has to exist now, somehow.
It must in some sense exist now in the present. Otherwise, our thoughts and words about him would be empty, referring to nothing, which is impossible. The source then presents two ways to deal with this conclusion about Washington.
Okay.
One is that he literally still exists now, which is where Parmenides' relentless logic pushes him. The other option, the one that feels much more reasonable to us, is that when we use the name George Washington, we aren't actually talking about the person who lived and died, but rather about the man who bore that name in the past. Or maybe we're talking about a concept, an idea associated with that name.
Right, like a historical concept.
But the problem, as our source carefully points out, is that Parmenides fundamentally assumes that words have a constant, unchanging meaning, like a fixed target, a referent, that must eternally exist for the word to be meaningful.
Like a dictionary definition that points to a real thing.
Exactly. He assumes the meaning is stable, unmoving, and that this stable meaning demands a continuously existing object in reality. What he completely misses, or maybe ignores, is what the source calls the perpetual change in the meanings of words and how we actually use them.
How language evolves and context matters.
Precisely. When we say George Washington today, we're not, magically summoning the physical man into the present. Instead, that name triggers a whole complex web of memories, associations, historical facts, ideas in our minds. None of that actually requires the man himself to be currently existing the same way he did in the 1700s.
Our language allows for talking about the past without making the past present.
Yes, our language allows for historical reference without demanding ontological presentism, the idea that only the present is real.
That distinction between the name as a trigger for concepts and the actual person, that feels absolutely crucial for seeing where Parmenides' logic goes off the rails for us. Let's take another example the sources use. It highlights the same kind of logical trap. The statement, Hamlet was Prince of Denmark. Now that's a true statement.
Right. True within the context of the play.
Well, how would Parmenides handle Hamlet?
Well, for Parmenides, if Hamlet is a name, a word we can think and speak, then Hamlet must be a real person.
He has to exist.
He has to exist. Otherwise, how could you coherently speak of him? His logic just doesn't have a category for fictional characters or imaginary beings. They can be thought, so they must be.
So what's the counter-argument from the source?
The source provides a really critical counter. Hamlet is the name of an imaginary person. It suggests that, to be really precise and avoid Parmenides' trap, we should probably say something like, it is imagined that Hamlet is the name of a real person. Or maybe, according to Shakespeare's play, Hamlet refers to the Prince of Denmark.
Qualifying the context.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It again shows Parmenides' difficulty in distinguishing between what's real, what's conceptual, what's fictional, and what's purely linguistic, all based solely on the act of thinking or naming. His framework, while internally logical, just doesn't map well onto the nuances of human language, imagination, and different kinds of truth.
And it gets even clearer with the unicorn example, doesn't it? How would Parmenides' logic lead you to prove a unicorn exists if someone says, well, a unicorn has one horn, but a cow has two?
Right. We know unicorns are mythical. But how does his system deal with that?
Yeah.
The source unpacks this really well, showing the fundamental issue. For Parmenides, the proof that unicorns have one horn isn't that you go find one in a field, obviously impossible. The proof is that unicorns have one horn in books, in stories, and descriptions.
So the proof is linguistic or conceptual, not empirical.
Exactly. It means that, for Parmenides, all statements about unicorns are really about the word unicorn. and how it's consistently used in a certain context, like mythology. Just like statements about Hamlet are really about the word Hamlet within the context of the play.
So he conflates the word with the thing.
He struggles with that distinction, yes.
Yeah.
He blurs the lines between what exists in the world, what exists conceptually in our minds or in language, and what's just linguistic convention. He can't easily separate a physically existing cow from a conceptually existing unicorn, because if you can think of it, it is.
Okay, so given all these issues with the examples, what does this mean for Parmenides' big argument? The one about everything being the one and change being impossible. The sources also offer critiques, right? They point out the flaws.
They do, and it's really important to look at those criticisms. Later philosophers, obviously benefiting from centuries of thinking about logic and language, identified some very real problems in his system. The source flat out states that Parmenides' core move arguing from language and thought directly to the nature of reality.
Which it calls the first example of that kind of argument.
Right, the first example in philosophy of an argument from thought and language to the world at large. That argument is ultimately not accepted as valid by the main philosophical tradition that followed.
So why not? Where does it fail?
Well, the consensus became that while words do have to mean something for language to work at all, otherwise it's just noise, this doesn't, as Parmenides insisted, require the perpetual literal existence of their reference in the concrete way he suggests.
Meaning doesn't equal constant existence.
Right. The source points out a key weakness. Parmenides' argument ultimately makes no difference to the truth or falsehood of propositions in which the words occur. What that means is his logical system, while maybe internally consistent, doesn't really connect with how we actually use language to determine truth about the world.
Can you give an example of that?
Sure. The source discusses substituting names with descriptions, like swapping George Washington for first president of the United States. That might work fine in a simple statement like the first president of the United States was a general. Both are true,
Okay.
but it completely falls apart in other contexts. Consider the sentence, I hope George Washington will be the first president of the United States. You can't just swap the description in there and have it mean the same thing or even make sense in the same way.
Because hope relates to the person, the name, in a specific way tied to time and potential.
Exactly. This perfectly shows the limits of just equating a name with a description or assuming every word points to a constantly existing thing. The meaning of names, especially historical ones, is way more complex and depends heavily on context. It's not just a simple pointer.
And the source also mentions something about Parmenides concealing the changing meaning of words.
Yes, it emphasizes that the perpetual change in the meanings of words is concealed by Parmenides' very static absolute view of language. Our use of a name like George Washington today, as we discussed, triggers memories, ideas, historical knowledge, associations. It's a dynamic process. It's not a direct line to the historical figure as if he were standing right here.
Language isn't frozen.
No. Language is dynamic. It evolves. It's deeply tangled up with context, human experience, memory, convention. Parmenides, for all his logical brilliance, essentially tried to freeze language, demanding it conform to the absolute unchanging reality his reason dictated must exist. This deeper understanding of how language actually works, its relationship to time and concepts, was something his rigid framework couldn't fully accommodate.
This whole tangle of words meaning existence, it inevitably brings us to the even bigger, maybe even more perplexing issue of time itself. And Parmenides, staying consistent, had a really surprising take on memory too, didn't he? He argued memory can't be a source of real knowledge.
He did, which feels incredibly strange to us, right? Memory seems fundamental to knowledge.
Totally. So what was his reasoning there?
It follows directly, logically, from his core belief. Only what exists unchangingly right now can truly be known. His logic is pretty straightforward, even if the conclusion is unsettling. If memory is going to count as genuine knowledge, then the past event you're remembering must somehow be present to your mind now.
Okay.
But if an event is past, then by definition it is not in the present moment. And for Parmenides, if something is not, you cannot think it or know it. So if a past event is not now, how can you truly know it through memory?
Because the thing you're trying to know doesn't exist anymore.
Exactly. He's forcing us to confront a deep philosophical puzzle. How can we claim to know something that, by definition, no longer exists? He remains consistent with his principles, but it throws a huge wrench into how we understand our own minds and our connection to history.
And this creates a fascinating paradox within his own system, doesn't it? He argues that true knowledge is only of what is eternally present, past, present, future, all rolled into one eternal now.
Right, the unchanging one.
Yet our very act of remembering something specific, like talking about George Washington, seems to involve knowledge of the past. But by his own definition, that past event isn't being now, so how can we know it? It seems like a contradiction.
It absolutely does. The recollection itself, the memory, happens now. It is present, but it's clearly not identical with the event it's about.
The memory is now, the event was then.
Precisely. The memory describes a past event, which, according to Parmenides' strict rules, shouldn't be knowable if it no longer is. So the big question for his system is, how does he reconcile the undeniable human experience of remembering and talking about the past with his fundamental principle of unchanging, ever-present being?
And the answer is?
Well, within his own system, he really can't reconcile it satisfactorily. But the sources themselves give us a vital clue about how philosophy moved forward from this problem. They suggest that drawing these kinds of big metaphysical conclusions from language, like Parmenides did so boldly, is actually quite easy to do, and often misleading. The only way to avoid falling into these kinds of fallacious arguments, the source suggests, is to push the logical and psychological study of language further than has been done by most metaphysicians.
So we needed a better understanding of language itself.
Exactly. We needed a much more nuanced, sophisticated understanding of how words actually function, how they refer, how meaning changes, how they connect to concepts, memory, mental states. Parmenides, for all his genius, didn't have that sophisticated linguistic toolkit. But his challenge, his paradoxes, actually forced later thinkers to develop those tools, leading eventually to things like philosophy of language and cognitive science.
So his errors were productive in a way.
In a huge way. Parmenides inadvertently showed the limits of a purely logical, static view of reality and forced philosophy to get serious about the complexities of language, time, and human experience.
It's really clear, then, that Parmenides' ideas didn't just vanish after he presented them. Even if people didn't buy his most extreme conclusions, like change being totally impossible.
Which was a tough sell, understandably.
Right. But his underlying logical method and the questions he raised, they profoundly shaped Western philosophy for literally millennia.
Absolutely. You can't deny his influence. As we mentioned, giants like Plato and Socrates knew him personally. They wrestled with his arguments. His invention of this rigorous, logic-based metaphysics really set a new standard for how philosophy was done. It shifted from just observing or speculating to deductive reasoning about reality itself.
And his arguments, even the paradoxical ones, like the impossibility of change, which his student Zeno famously defended with his paradoxes.
Zeno's paradoxes, yeah.
Sure.
Achilles and the tortoise, the arrow.
Right. Those arguments compelled later thinkers to be much more precise in their own reasoning, didn't they?
They absolutely did.
Mm-hmm.
As the sources wisely point out, refutations are seldom final. In most cases, they are only a prelude to further refinements. Parmenides' challenging ideas didn't shut down discussion, they fueled it. They forced deeper analysis, the development of more sophisticated concepts to try and reconcile his powerful logic with our undeniable experience of a changing world.
And one really key concept that seems to have emerged directly from grappling with Parmenides, even if it wasn't a full acceptance of his no-change idea, was this enduring philosophical idea of substance.
Yes. That's a monumental takeaway.
The sources highlight that what later philosophy, right down to modern times, really took from Parmenides wasn't the impossibility of all change that was just too much, too paradoxical, but rather the indestructibility of substance.
This is such a crucial point. It represents a really clever evolution of Parmenides' core insight. Now, the specific word substance didn't pop up immediately with his direct successors, but the idea, the concept, was definitely there in how they started thinking.
Okay, so what is substance in this context?
Substance came to be understood as the persistent subject of varying predicates.
Persistent subject of varying predicates. Okay, what does that mean in plain English?
Think of it like this. A predicate is just a quality or a characteristic like green, tall, hot, moving. A subject is the thing that has those qualities. So substance is the underlying thing, the unchanging essence, the basic stuff that stays the same even when its attributes or states change.
Ah, okay. Give me an example.
Sure. Think of a tree. It grows from a tiny sapling. It loses its leaves in winter. It gets new ones in spring. Maybe it gets taller. These are all changes in its predicates, its qualities, its states.
Right.
But philosophers after Parmenides wanted to say that the tree itself, the underlying substance, remains the same thing throughout all these changes. It doesn't just vanish and reappear each season.
It endures.
It endures. Or think about a block of marble being carved into a statue. The shape changes dramatically. It's change in predicates. But the substance, the marble itself, is seen as staying constant. It's still marble. This idea of substance as the unchanging core, the substratum beneath the changes, became absolutely fundamental in philosophy, psychology, even theology for over 2,000 years. Thinkers from Aristotle right through Descartes, Locke on Marbet, they all relied heavily on some version of this concept.
So it was basically a way to respect Parmenides' powerful argument about nothing coming from nothing or going into nothing,
Exactly, honoring the logic of conservation of being.
without having to deny the really obvious fact that things do change all around us. It allowed them to say, okay, there's an unchanging core, a fundamental what is, even if the surface appearances are constantly shifting.
That's a perfect summary. It was a brilliant philosophical compromise, really. Parmenides forced everyone to think rigorously about what truly is versus what merely appears to be. The concept of substance. Let them acknowledge the apparent changes we see with our senses, Parmenides' way of opinion, while still holding on to a deeper, unchanging reality that satisfied his logical demands, a kind of refined way of truth.
So even when they disagreed with his most extreme conclusions, later philosophers were building directly on the questions he forced them to ask.
Absolutely. His arguments, even the ones eventually refuted, acted as this incredible catalyst for deeper, more nuanced thinking about being, change, and reality itself.
Wow, what an incredible deep dive that was into the mind of Parmenides. We've really unpacked his truly radical challenge to the whole idea of change, his audacious claim that what can be thought must be, and the profound, sometimes frankly bewildering implications that has for language, thought, and our basic grasp of reality and time. We dug into his surprising ideas about memory and how his powerful, maybe flawed, but definitely relentless logic held his whole unchanging worldview together. It's just amazing how one person's rigorous thinking forced millennia of philosophers to wrestle with questions that honestly still echo today.
He really did.
Mm.
Parmenides, despite how strange some of his conclusions seem to us now,
Mm-hmm.
he forces us to ask these truly fundamental questions that are still incredibly relevant, like
Yeah.
if our language and thoughts about things somehow imply their existence, what does that really say about the limits of what we can truly know
Mm.
or even conceive of,
Mm.
especially in a world that just constantly appears to be in flux?
Mm.
Are our words, maybe in some subtle way, holding us hostage to an unchanging reality he glimpsed? Or do they, perhaps paradoxically, actually allow us to dance with change, but maybe with a much deeper awareness of the linguistic and logical complexities involved? He really makes you question the tools you use to understand everything.
Well, hopefully, this deep dive has given all of you listening some surprising facts, some new insights to really chew on. Maybe next time you use someone's name or talk about something from the past, or even just, notice the leaves changing color on a tree, you might just find yourself thinking of Parmenides, wondering a little more deeply about the true nature of what is and what merely appears to be.
It definitely makes you think twice.
It does. Until next time, keep exploring and keep questioning.